إن الله وملائكته يصلون على النبي يا أيها الذين آمنوا صلوا عليه وسلموا تسليما. اللهم صل الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن محمدًا رسول الله أشهد أن محمدًا رسول الله أشهد أن عليًا ولي الله أشهد أن عليًا ولي الله حي على الصلاة حي على الصلاة حي على الفلاح حي على الفلاح حي على خير العمل حي على خير العمل الله أكبر الله أكبر لا إله إلا الله لا إله إلا الله
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين بارئ الخلائق أجمعين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين المبعوث رحمة للعالمين سيدنا ومولانا أبي القاسم محمد وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين ولعنة الله على أعدائهم إلى قيام يوم الدين رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي أما بعد. Dear brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. We have spoken a little bit about the teachings of Ahlul Bayt with regard to the importance of earning one's livelihood and taking care of oneself and one's family. Not just so that a person has enough money to take care of their needs, but also because work and effort and striving for one's earning and for one's livelihood is inherently something that brings blessing and dignity to a person. And so, even if there isn't financial need, it is still good to invest and to work, because that is how we seek and we see the blessing of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. There is a hadith from a companion of our sixth Imam, Imam Ja'far al-Sadiq alayhi salatu wassalam, by the name of Muhammad ibn Udafir. He says that the Imam gave me 1,700 dirhams, and that was a considerable amount of money that may have been for a normal laborer, perhaps the amount that they would earn in a year's worth of work or more. So it was a considerable amount of capital. And he says that the sixth Imam gave me this amount, 1,700 dinars, which is gold coins, even more large a sum of money. And the Imam says that ittajir biha, go and engage in commerce, buy and sell goods and earn a profit. And then according to the narration, the Imam says that I don't need the profit. It's not that it's important to me to earn additional income, but I want Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to see me looking for and seeking His blessings and being a good caretaker and a steward of the resources that He has put at my disposal. And that is a very important difference between a believer and a non-believer. One part of the difference is that a materialistic person or a non-believer, they can only look at the quantity of their wealth. Meaning they can only measure their wealth in terms of how much do I have. And a person with $10 is richer than a person with $1. A person with $100 is richer than a person with $10, and so on. But for a believer, it is not the quantity of your wealth that is most important, but it is the blessing and the quality and the purity of your wealth that is the true measure. So we are not looking just for rizq wasi' or kathir, but we are looking for rizq that is tayyib and that is blessed by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that is pure. And in that analysis, maybe a person with $1 is better off and richer than a person with $10. Maybe a person with $10 is better off and richer than a person with $100. Richer in the sense that their life is enriched, and they will have tranquility, and they will have happiness, and they will have dignity in a way that a person with much more may not have. That's not to say that being wealthy is bad or that being poor is good, but it is to say that the standard is not the quantity, but rather the purity and the blessing of what we have. That is one difference between a believer and a non-believer. And we have to remind ourselves of this every single day, because every single day society will be giving us the exact opposite message. And it will be making us to feel inadequate or inferior or competitive purely on the basis of how much we have. When in reality, that doesn't mean that you are going to have a better life. That doesn't mean that you are going to have a better conscience. That doesn't mean that you are going to have more success in what is truly important with your family and with your religious and spiritual goals, and what is the most important in your eternal life and in your accounting before Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So we have to remind ourselves that the standard given to us by general society and maybe even our friends, and maybe even our co-workers, is not a true standard of success or a true measure of what is important in our lives. The first difference between a believer and a non-believer is that for a believer, earning a pure livelihood is more valuable than earning a very abundant livelihood. And related to that, a second difference is that our relationship to work and effort is not based on our personal need. Sometimes people, they think about what they need, and if they don't need something, they think it's okay to squander it, to take it for granted, or to waste it. Sometimes, for example, we have food, and because our fridge is full, we don't worry about not finishing our meal and throwing it away. When it was the sunnah of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam and the sunnah of Ahlul Bayt not to waste even a portion of a date, even a single grain of rice, even a single piece of bread. Some of us may remember the elders in our family, they used to maintain those values, and many of us, we may have gotten careless and forgotten about it, or it may not be convenient. It's just quicker rather than to pack up a meal and say that I will finish it later, or to pack it up from a restaurant and take it home, to say throw it away. And sometimes we are embarrassed because if I go out with you, I don't want you to think that I am stingy because I'm packing up the portion of a meal. And then there are some people, they might pack up, let's say if there is leftover in a restaurant, the meat. But the bread and the rice, because it's not as valuable, so they'll say, I'll throw that away, but if there's leftover kebab, I'll take that and I'll pack it and then I will eat that later. But the point in Islam is not how expensive that portion of the meal is. The cheaper part you throw away and the more expensive part you keep. The point in Islam is that our relationship to our wealth and the resources that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us is not based on our need. It is based on our gratitude and our recognition that it comes from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So I'm not inconvenienced by finishing my meal. And if I become full at home or when I am eating out before the meal is over, then I don't say, well, it's too much trouble to pack it. Or my home already has enough food, my fridge is not empty, I don't need to bring it home. Or I will be embarrassed because somebody might think that there's no need for it. Establishing good practices for ourselves and for our friends, reviving the sunnah of Muhammad wa ali Muhammad alayhimus salatu wassalam, is not something to be embarrassed about. So when it comes to our food, let us think of every morsel as a gift. Not because I'm starving, or because I don't have food at home. Not because there are other people who are starving, although that is true, but because every morsel is a gift, even if I have thousands of dollars and I don't worry about food insecurity. Similarly, when it comes to wudu, we have been told al-wudu'u bimud, about a tall glass of water that is approximately the measure known as a mud in Arabic. That is the amount of water that you should use in wudu. And this is something that is the sunnah. And it is a sunnah not because water was scarce in the desert. Some people think that, well, of course, in Arabia, water was very precious because it wasn't abundant. There weren't rivers and big lakes. And so in Medina, they used to measure every drop. In Mecca, they used to measure every drop. But we have abundant water. Even if you are at the banks of a large river, or even bigger than a river, even if you are on the shore of an ocean, and you have billions and billions of gallons of water in front of you, it is still sunnah of the Prophet to use only one mud in wudu. Don't waste it. Don't leave the faucet running and say it's not going to go dry, or it's not going to run out. Don't waste water and say it's just going to make it back into the water table or make it back into the lake anyway. It's not whether it's going to go back or not. It's not whether you need it or not. But it is a relationship towards Allah and towards the creation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that even if I have a great deal, I will live in moderation. Because when I am by the ocean, if I think then I don't need to worry about moderation, then when I don't have anything, I will have the opposite extreme. Whereas Islam wants us, when we have abundance, to still use moderately, and when we are in hardship, to still live with trust in Allah and moderation and not lose hope that He will give us help. So when it comes to your food, when it comes to the resources that you use, water and other resources, when it comes to your money and your other assets, don't say, well, I can wear my clothes very roughly because I can afford to buy new clothes. No. Wear them well. There are ahadith that tell us, as we will look at when we talk about how to dress, that a person should not wear their formal clothes at home when they are cleaning and working around the house, because that is wasteful, even if you can afford it. But it is not something that is moderate, and it is not something that shows gratitude for that gift and that resource that has come from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So in summary, the two differences between a believer and a non-believer. A believer will not look at just how much they have, but they will look at how blessed it is and how pure it is. And that is the important measure, because that brings blessings, that brings peace of mind and tranquility, and that brings benefit to our family, and it brings reward in the hereafter. And second, a believer will not say, how should I live and how much should I spend, based on how much I can afford. And when we can afford much, then we become wasteful and we become careless. But rather we will make that decision based on what is dignified and what is moderate and what shows gratitude to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so a believer will not waste water because there is a drought. He will not avoid wasting water because of a drought or because of scarcity. A believer will avoid wasting water whether there is a drought or whether there is an infinite amount of water in front of him or her. They will avoid wasting because they want to be respectful and grateful to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. And it is for this reason that Allah has recommended that we engage in commerce and that we engage in business. There is a hadith from our sixth Imam, Imam Ja'far al-Sadiq alayhi salatu wassalam. He says, "At-tijaratu tazidu fil aql." One of the things that increases your intellect and your aql is to go and engage in commerce and to understand the value of money. Many of us can relate to this. When our parents would give us an allowance or they would take care of our needs, we didn't have an appreciation of how much something is worth. But then when you work your first job and you realize that that meal is an hour's or more than an hour's work at minimum wage, all of a sudden it's a completely different calculation. That is one step of getting aql. And it's sometimes possible that we used to work a minimum wage job, but now we have moved past that, alhamdulillah, if Allah has blessed us and we don't have that need, and so we have become distant, and we don't really understand the importance and the value of the blessings that we have in our life. So the Imams, they tell us that keep a connection to commerce, to earning, so that you have that intellect that helps you make good decisions. Of course, once you have the intellect, then you want to measure what you learn about the marketplace according to your religious standards. Because true intellect is not just to know the monetary value of everything, but to understand the spiritual value. And that is why faith itself is described in our ahadith and in verses of the Quran as tijara, as commerce, a transaction. إِنَّ اللَّهَ اشْتَرَى مِنَ الْمُؤْمِنِينَ أَنفُسَهُمْ وَأَمْوَالَهُمْ بِأَنَّ لَهُمُ الْجَنَّةِ. Allah has purchased from the believers their selves and their money. Why? Because He is offering in exchange Jannah. Now, if you don't know commerce, then you won't be able to appreciate the value of that transaction, because whatever you're offering, whether it's a 30-year lifespan or a 100-year lifespan, it's nothing in exchange for what Allah is offering you. And whatever your amwal are, anfus and amwal, whether it be a single dollar ripped and torn in your wallet, or whether it be $1 million or $10 million, it's still nothing in exchange for what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is offering. If you don't understand the value of that transaction, then you will not rush towards engaging in that successful transaction with Allah. But if you do understand the value of a dollar and you can only see it from a materialist perspective, then you will say, I want to give my money to Allah. I want to keep it. I want to give my life to Allah. I want to keep it. So commerce gives you the ability to make judgments about relative value. But then remember, it's not just a materialist calculation. It is a spiritual calculation. And what you are buying and selling is not just your possessions, but it is also your very existence and your life. And we should not sell ourselves for anything, in the words of a hadith of Imam Ali alayhi salatu wassalam, for anything less than Jannah and paradise. There is a hadith of our first Imam, Imam Ali ibn Abi Talib alayhi salatu wassalam. He indicates this tendency that although commerce gives you aql, there is also a pull towards worldliness. According to a hadith of Imam Ali, he says, Ya ma'ashar al-tujjar al-fiqh thumma al-matjar. First, learn the rules of buying and selling. What is halal and what is haram? And don't just go and engage in commerce and then find out that you have now entered into haram transactions. You are purchasing and selling things on interest, or maybe being deceptive and going against the commandments of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And then the Imam says, At-tajir fajir. A person who engages in commerce is sinful. At-tajir, fajir. You know the word fasiq wa fajir? So a person who engages in commerce is sinful. Wal-fajiru fin-nar. And a person who is sinful is headed towards hellfire. So commerce is good or bad? Imam Ali is saying that if you look at default and inertia, then at-tajiru fajir, wal-fajiru fin-nar. That will take you towards hellfire. إِلَّا مَنْ أَخَذَ الْحَقِّ وَأَعْطَى الْحَقِّ. Except a person who measures their transactions and centers their transactions on the basis of haqq. أَعْطَى الْحَقِّ وَأَخَذَ الْحَقِّ. When you give and when you take, you measure it not based on squeezing the last cent of profit, but on honesty, integrity, fairness, justice. If you do that, then your tijara is not leading you towards fujur and sinfulness, and it is not leading you towards nar or punishment in the hereafter. So we have two different outcomes to be aware of. Commerce is recommended, but we should recognize that, as Imam Ali says, it pulls us towards worldliness. It pulls us alhaakumut takathur, to wanting more and more, to getting better and better, and learning how we can cut corners and how we can just maximize our profit. Imam Ali warns us that although commerce is good, it has that risk. That is the outcome that you should be aware of and you should protect against. And how do you protect? Al-fiqh, thumma al-matjar. First, learn the rules of Islam. What is it that we should avoid? And second, always center your transaction not on what you're going to get out of it and how much you're going to profit, but on haqq and on honesty and truth. And then in another hadith, Imam Ali gives us a little bit more detail. This is also fiqh. Sometimes when we think of fiqh, we think of rule number 1, rule number 2, rule number 5, section B, subsection 3. That's not what fiqh is. Fiqh is to have an understanding and a depth of comprehension of what are the values and the goals of any action or any decision that we might take in life. So this hadith of Imam Ali, it gives us some instruction in that regard. Amir al-Mu'mineen Ali ibn Abi Talib alayhi salatu wassalam, salawat ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. He says, Ya ma'ashar al-tujjar, O people who are engaged in commerce. This is a form of ahadith that when Imam Ali was ruling from Kufa, he wouldn't just be limited to the masjid and giving khutbahs, but he would go into the market and he would address people who were selling different kinds of food or different kinds of goods, and he would tell them what they should be on guard against. So the Imam says, Ya ma'ashar al-tujjar, ittaqullaha azza wa jal. Remember Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Normally when you are in the marketplace, when you're in the mall, when you're in the thick of buying and selling, then you're not thinking about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But that is where you need to think about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because that is where shaitan is going to come and distract you and tempt you, whether you're selling or whether you're buying. Especially today's commercial environments where the advertisements that you will see, the sounds that you will hear, the sights that you will see, everything is a distraction from Allah. Ittaqullah. And then the Imam says, Qaddimul istikhara. Before you embark in a transaction, then do istikhara. And istikhara, literally, it doesn't mean you take out a Quran. Should I buy the red tomatoes or the yellow tomatoes? The onions. Should I buy this type of fruit or that type of fruit? That's not what istikhara is. Istikhara is before you engage in any transaction. Talabul khair min Allah. Seek blessing from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You're going to buy your groceries, then say, Oh Allah, make it something that brings us health and brings us strength, and that is a source of barakah for our lives. You go and you are buying clothing, then pray that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives you the tawfiq in those clothes to pray and to worship and to avoid sinning. You're going for a major purpose, an appliance, a car, something major. قَدِّمُ الْإِسْتِخَارَ. Seek from Allah the good of that transaction. And what happens? When you buy your food with istikhara, when you buy your clothing with istikhara, then right from the very outset, you are remembering Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That will bring you one extra protection. Because when I wear that clothing, I will say, I bought this with a dua. Now how can I go somewhere in these clothes that would not be pleasing to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? How can I go somewhere in this car that would not be pleasing to Allah? I bought it with a dua. And the same thing is when you are selling. قَدِّمُ الْإِسْتِخَارَ. Ask Allah for barakah in the sale and in the profit that you make. وَاتَّبَرَّكُوا بِالسُّهُولَةِ. And if you want to seek barakah, then be easygoing. Don't put out the most strict and harsh tone that you can do. Let things go. Be easygoing and dignified. And tabarraku bis-suhula. That brings barakah in your transaction. And then the Imam says, تجافوا عن الظلم وأنصفوا المظلومين ولا تقربوا الربا وأوفوا الكيل والميزان ولا تبخسوا الناس أشياءهم ولا تعثوا في الأرض مفسدين. Quoting instructions that we have from the Quran. Remember that your religious values are going to show themselves when you are living and dealing with other people, Muslims and non-Muslims. That is when we show, do I care about justice? Or is justice just a slogan on social media, but then when I am engaged in a transaction, I'm just looking out for myself? So the Imam reminds us that your religious values, your value of justice, and your value of helping those who are oppressed or less fortunate, avoiding fasad, that's going to show itself when you enter the marketplace and when you are dealing with and interacting with other people. The value that Imam Ali reminds us of is barakah and seeking the bounty of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to avoid that harmful effect of commerce, which is takathur. Just thinking that we need more and more. May Allah grant us abundant rizq, but may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless us in our lives and in our livelihood, in our work and in our effort, so that the sum total of our life's work brings us benefit in this life and in the hereafter. It brings us together with our family rather than tearing us apart. And our lives are filled with love rather than jealousy and competition, and service to Allah and to Islam and to our fellow human beings rather than selfishness and looking out only for ourselves. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Inna a'tainaka al-kawthar fasalli li rabbika wanhar inna shani'aka huwa al-abtar. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا ونبينا أبي القاسم محمد وعلى علي أمير المؤمنين وعلى فاطمة الزهراء وعلى الحسن والحسين وعلي بن الحسين ومحمد بن علي وجعفر بن محمد وموسى بن جعفر وعلي بن موسى ومحمد بن علي وعلي بن محمد والحسن بن علي والحجة بن الحسن القائم المهدي صلوات الله عليهم أجمعين. صلوات. I begin by seeking Allah's forgiveness for myself, for all of us present, for all mu'mineen and mu'minat throughout the world. And in the second khutbah, I want to just mention one hadith from our sixth Imam, Imam Ja'far al-Sadiq alayhi salatu wassalam. And that pertains to our commerce and our transactions with our fellow believers. There is a special teaching that we have which goes beyond our legal requirement, and that is our moral obligation when we are dealing with our fellow mu'mineen and mu'minat. And that is that try not to profit off of their needs, but try to work as a friend and a helper, and not just as somebody who is on a business transaction when you are dealing with members of your fellow community. A hadith of our sixth Imam, Imam Ja'far al-Sadiq alayhi salatu wassalam. He says, رِبْحُ الْمُؤْمِنِ عَلَى الْمُؤْمِنِ riba. One form of interest, or riba, haram and unblessed earnings, is if you try to earn a profit over a fellow believer. Now, not every form of riba is haram. According to the ahadith of the Imams, sometimes I might give you a gift just in the hope of earning some benefit from you in the future. That's not haram. I want to kind of build a bridge, and I think that maybe one day you're going to give me a reference. Maybe one day you're going to connect me to somebody who can give me a benefit. So I bring you an offering, a gift. That is not haram. It's not haram for me to give it, and it is not haram for you to take it. But according to the ahadith of Ahlul Bayt, that is a form of riba, and la yarbu indallah. That's not going to actually bring you barakah and benefit in the eyes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So not every form of riba is referring to haram interest, but sometimes it is referring to that worldly desire we have to get ahead, looking for our self-interest. This is one of these types of riba. The Imam is not saying it's haram for me to do a service for you and then charge you a profit. But it means that my reaction or my relationship with a fellow believer is not a relationship of brotherhood, it is a relationship of transaction. And that is a form of riba. It doesn't, la yarbu indallah. It doesn't give barakah and blessing, even if it is not haram. Then the Imam, he says that إِلَّا أَن يَشْتَرِيَ بِأَكْثَرَ مِن مِئَةِ دِرْهَمٍ فَارْبَحْ عَلَيْهِ قُوتَ يَوْمِكَ. Unless, for example, there's something that you bought for 100 dirhams. And then if you want, go ahead and profit just what you need for your daily expenses. So in other words, the Imam is saying, earn a minimum profit when you're dealing with a believer. Let's say that I'm selling something to you, and if it's a considerable expense, 100 dirhams was a considerable expense, Imam says, فَارْبَحْ عَلَيْهِ قُوتَ يَوْمِكَ. Go ahead and earn what you need to live your life, but don't try to get rich off of the back of your fellow believer. Qutul yawm, maybe it was like 1 dirham, 2 dirhams back in that day. So if you've incurred an expense of 100 dirhams, go ahead and earn 1, 2 dirhams, whatever you need for your daily expenses, but this isn't what you're trying to do to get rich. Or the Imam says, أَوْ يَشْتَرِيهِ لِلتِّجَارَةِ فَارْبَحُوا عَلَيْهِمْ وَارْفُقُوا بِهِمْ. Or if this is your business, now of course, if I am an electrician, then that's how I earn my livelihood. If I am a taxi driver, then that's how I earn my livelihood. If I am a caterer, that's how I earn my livelihood. And if I don't charge a profit to my customers when they are believers, then I'm not going to be able to pay my rent or pay my mortgage and meet my expenses. So the Imam says that if that is your tijara, if you've bought something for commerce, then go ahead and earn a fair profit. But remember, when you're dealing with believers, وَارْفُقُوا بِهِمْ, then be gentle with them and take the lower end of the profit. So you still have an element, it's still now a transaction, but there is an element of being a brother. There is an element of being a friend and not just the party to a business transaction. Earn your profit, but earn the lesser end of what you would charge, not just the median or the greater end. It's a beautiful reminder from our sixth Imam, Imam Ja'far al-Sadiq alayhi salatu wassalam, of our relationship with our fellow believers. And let us always remember that we should think of our mu'mineen and mu'minat as our own family members, as our own friends. And when we enter into a business relationship with them, we are looking for their interests and not just for our own. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Inna Allaha ya'muru bil adli wal ihsani wa ita'i dhil qurba wa yanha 'anil fahsha'i wal munkari wal baghi ya'idhukum la'allakum tadhakkarun. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Salatul Jumu'ah. Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar. Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah, ashhadu an la ilaha illallah. Ashhadu anna Muhammadar Rasulullah, ashhadu anna Muhammadar Rasul.